Well, first I'm going to say, wow. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm just blown away, quite frankly. I have to back up for just a moment because I have a beautiful question, I think, for you to start with. When you got the phone call from your uncle to come into his business, just as a family member to start with, how did you perceive? We knew Halston as this glorious creature and creator, and he wasn't, as this said, estranged from the family. But what was the perception of him by you, who were starting your life out of school?
Well, overall, he was my loving, adoring uncle, and he had always sort of been close with the family, although my father and our family had lived overseas on and off for most of our youth. But we would always come back to New York, and he would host us at his house wherever he lived there and tease us and have fun with his little niece and nephews. But when he called me and invited me to work with him, I had just graduated from college, and I was very excited to have the opportunity to work with him and live in his orbit. I had no idea what I was getting into, and really what was on the horizon was quite a shock.
Were you equipped for that?
I wasn't equipped for that, no. I still am not equipped for that. Revisiting it, I am reliving all those horrible times. The end was horrible. It was painful for him. It was painful for the family to watch him go through this, and painful for me that I really couldn't do anything for him except just hold his hand and comfort him and let him know I loved him.
It seemed also that on the personal side that he really withheld his emotions, and there wasn't really anyone that he shared if he had fears, which he perhaps did in the human side of him. Was there anyone he shared those with?
Tim and Karen, he was very close with them, and Tim has a very strong mind too, and he and Halston would spar each other a little bit in those situations. Once Tim mentioned he came back, they were living with Halston in Montauk, and
Karen, it's Karen Bjornsson, the blonde model with the short hair that you see in the film.
But
And,
he had had a very rough week. Tim had been working for Angelo Donghia. It was sort of a little circle there, but the fabulous atelier that Halston first started at was designed by Angelo Donghia. So Tim came on the scene. Tim's brother was a very successful, handsome model, Joe McDonald, and again, it was this incestuous sort of circle, but Karen was modeling as well, and Joe passed away and told Tim he had to marry Karen, so he dutifully married Karen. But they all became very close friends, and Tim came back to Montauk one evening after a hard week, like I said, and fixed himself a drink and sat down in the living room, and Halston said, "Well, Timmy, how was your week?" And Tim said, "It just really sucked." And Halston said, "Well, whose fault is that?" And it was kind of a Zen lesson in a way. It's like, well, you're the master of your destiny, and you have to kind of keep on top of it and make sure that your life is what you want it to be and your business is what you want it to be. And I think it was sort of a double-edged sword comment that my uncle at that point was already, the business had been pulled out from under him, and he was probably thinking, how could I have done this differently? But he didn't articulate those sort of things very much. No, he was very quiet.
There's a story that you told us also that I love, is you and Halston watching the Karen Carpenter story.
Right.
Do you want to tell that for the audience?
Hospital. About a month before he passed away, we were watching Entertainment Tonight, because that was one of his favorite shows. His whole life he hadn't gotten a chance to watch television, but he watched television a lot in the last couple of months. And Entertainment Tonight, was about his friends and what they were wearing. but there was a movie about Karen Carpenter, her sad demise, and he kind of had a reflective moment and turned to me and said, "Gosh, I had everything I ever wanted, and maybe I should have done things differently." And we always sort of wondered what the answer to that would have been, done
You
things
didn't ask
differently.
him. You didn't ask him what.
I didn't feel it was my position at that time to ask. I certainly would have liked to have asked him a few questions.
Frederick, I have a question for you. You used your editing magic wand to make a statement when, as it was described, the hostile selling of samples took place under Carl Epstein's direction. And you asked that specific question about didn't you even consider sending these, contacting a museum? There was a hesitation, and then you didn't. What did he ever answer that?
What is implied by his lack of answer? I mean, the look on his face is just sort of as if he was thinking about it for the first time, which is, I think, what the point I was trying to make is. After that, he just sort of said something along the lines of like, I didn't really think about it at the time. And but another thing that Carl said, which I wanted to include, and it was in the earlier cuts, is that in his opinion, and that goes to tell you how he didn't really understand what fashion was. He said in his opinion, they had the patterns and they had some of the fabrics, so they didn't need the dresses, because they could recreate them. But I spent about 5 minutes trying to explain that it was not the same thing, but it didn't really understand.
Well, the rarefied world of high fashion is not the mass world, so it's two different. It's speaking
Right.
hieroglyphics and
Right.
English. They're two different things. So,
Yeah.
so I have a question about his fascination and influence from Charles James, and that he was influenced by, but he relaxed. But Charles James himself was very affected in his demeanor, and Halston was a Midwestern boy. So I think, in all of that I've read, this is just my summary, and I wanted to ask you this. Did Halston's grandness kind of come from his time with Charles James? And his demeanor, because obviously I'm from the Midwest. We weren't raised to be so fabulously grand,
Well, that could be. I know that Charles James was a huge influence in Halston's life in many ways. They first met in Chicago when Halston was still designing hats. And Charles was involved in society, and Halston had always sort of gravitated towards the higher end. And so Charles introduced him to his friends and took him overseas with him. And I guess he understood that he used to say to me, you have to create an illusion of success, whether you are or not. So I'm still trying. But,
Love those streaks in your hair. Fabulous.
But they were very close for a period of time, but it depicted their relationship pretty well, that it was father-son, and then they started competing with each other. But Charles James had a lot of personal and perhaps even mental issues towards the end that he was very difficult to be around. But I had a funny story, really quick funny story, is that, to your point, is that Halston's younger sister was living in Arkansas, and they moved there when she was about 14. And of course, Halston had created this grand image with a sort of pseudo-British accent. And his sister came to visit, and Charles was pinning and trying on some outfits for a client during the day. And Halston said, let's take her in this outfit to the Côte Basque. And he reserved the best table that had the best view when you walked from it all along the whole restaurant to the restrooms. And so at a certain point he said, Sue, no, get up and don't talk to anyone. Just walk straight to the bathroom and just smile to the left, smile to your right, and just definitely don't say anything, because you're the Polish princess. So she was beautiful. She was beautiful. But she obliged and didn't really know why, but it was he didn't want anyone to hear that his sister had a Southern accent.
So he understood. He knew what he was building, that
he
charisma
knew what he was
around
building,
him.
right.
So we have a kind of a Texas-related question, because it didn't really. I mean, obviously things are on the editing floor, and you never know where to spend time when you're telling a story, which is what you do when you write and direct. Is Estelle Marsh? Is it Waltington? Was she actually in her obituary? It did say that she was his financial backer when, I guess, when he left Bergdorf. That was when it mentions in the film that, and she was from Amarillo. She's from the Marsh family. You all know who the Cadillac family. The Cadillacs are sitting like this, and west of Amarillo, that's the Marsh family. So that's where his funding came from. Is that correct?
It's correct. Her last name is Watlington.
Watlington,
And
okay.
she was a big customer at Bergdorf, and she believed in his design and his charisma and really wanted to help him go on to the next phase. So she did plunk down, I think it was about $125,000 in 1967. And he was so excited and honored that she allowed him this big privilege to move on, which he did obviously move on with great success. And as soon as he made that back, he paid her back right away. He was an honorable man in that regard. And he also used to mention later on in life there were so many people that would borrow money from him and never pay him back, and it bothered him. But he paid her back, and Dennis Christopher paid him back too. So for the record, Dennis Christopher paid Halston back.
And I have a question also for you, and we'd love to open it up to the floor. Frederick, you're having come here, and it was such a privilege to meet you the first time when you came here for Dior and I. I was reminding him that his first words to me were about when he started. I was like, "How did you get into this part of fashion? Does it really interest you?" And he said, "Well, I held a camera during the filming of the Last Emperor, Valentino's documentary, basically, which was very beautifully done." And he said from there he was then, I think, asked. You came into the was it the Diana Vreeland project next, and
Right.
then Dior and I, right?
Mm.
So you have become. I have to thank you on behalf of our industry, because it is such a pleasure to have this wealth of knowledge open to all of us that love and adore these stories. I know there's a lot of theater in fashion too, so there are stories to be told. But I was curious about what's next on your horizon.
I wish I could say fashion, although I'm working very hard to move, outside of fashion and show a little bit of a range. And even when I started doing Halston, I was already sort of planning the early stages of a screenplay that I'm writing that has to do more with music, and I'm doing another documentary that's art related. So it's all about the creative process for me. I think that's why, fashion has been such a great source of inspiration, because I've been able to tell those stories. But film, music, art, all of it is very inspiring for me. So yeah.
And on this one, because there was, I understand, a lack of, because things were destroyed, right? In terms of footage, was it challenging in this one?
There was a set of copies. Lesley had a set of copies, because it's actually said in the film. The lawyer says Halston had a set of copies. The lawyers made sure we included that line. Seriously, no, because the lawyers were really scared that the corporation was going to come after us and claim defamation or something. So we had to cross our T's and make sure everything we were saying was completely accurate. And so yes, there was another set of copies, which doesn't, to me, diminish the cruelty of the act, of just erasing the corporation's set of copies. But that was the starting point for our research, and then we moved even beyond that, because we found even places like NBC, which we knew had shot a documentary on Halston going to China, but we had heard about it, and we'd found some footage, but really not that much. we went after them and like insisted, and then finally they found like 5 tapes of raw footage of Halston, you know, that were sitting on a shelf for like 35 years, and so that's kind of a gold mine when you start finding that, because it's 5 hours unedited, uncensored. Halston's hand, the magic image maker hand, hasn't touched it yet, so it's very raw, and you can see something different from the, you know, the kind of images that were built outside of that. So yeah, it was the most extensive like archival research that I've ever done by far. I mean, it was kind of thrilling, and that's why I think you know, the character of the archivist sort of became more of a thing, because I really felt like we were doing an investigation, you know, and who could have this, who could have that, who could have that memo that, you know, explains what happened in '84, and you know, it was detective work, yeah.
She was a little haunting in there for sure. We'd love to open it up to questions. Do we have questions for Lesley or Frédéric? Yes?
Some of us were wondering here, what drove the narrative device, the fictional device that you used at inception to explain all the tapes, and then thereafter throughout the narrative?
So yeah, I guess you heard the question, right? Well, as I was saying, I think it started really with an image. You know, it always starts in my head with an image when I'm doing the research, and I think that this tapes being erased was just so shocking to me. It was like, who could do that, and why would they do that, and who was doing that, and how many hours did it take, and did they have to watch, you know, all 215 tapes, and watch Halston's life sort of fly by? And it became, I guess I'm a filmmaker, so I'm very, I mean, images mean something to me, and that's very much my daily life, is like watching, you know, tapes. So I think it became an entry point into Halston, and into, you know, the great image maker that he was, because there was a lot of footage. I mean, it was 215 tapes. You know, he understood that, you know, we don't really underline it in the film that much, although the whole film is about it in a sense, but he was the greatest image maker in fashion, and the first one to really understand the power of just marketing your image and putting yourself out there and becoming yourself, you know, the face of the brand, branding really, and if you want to even extend it to like Instagram, you know, he sort of had understood all of it before you know, it ever was available to the general public. So yeah, I think that it was a way of talking about images, you know, in a different way, and also telling. I think more profoundly, I think it helped me to tell the story in not a flat way, because I felt like Halston was anything but flat, and I really didn't want something that was just like, he was born here, he did this, and then he died. And I felt like there was much more mystery and much more enigma to Halston's story. His story was a little bit like a Hollywood film, you know, it had all the twists and turns and all the bigger-than-life characters, and I felt like doing justice to that story was not a linear kind of approach, but something that would be a little more thrilling and a little more enigmatic, and, you know.
Great. Questions? No other questions? Oh, yes?
A couple questions. Why did they erase the tapes?
Why did they erase the tapes? Well, the very prosaic answer is Carl Epstein wanted to make 50 cents a tape, you know, selling the blanks to Donna Karan. Yeah, he was going to sell the blanks to Donna Karan, who was taking over the showroom. And he somehow was like, well, maybe for 50 cents she'll take them. So that's it. It was bottom line, not even like, how much did they make? I guess you can make the math. It's probably like $125 they made.
Just another question. Why, what city in Arkansas did she live in? They knew it was coming because I'm from Arkansas. And I'm curious.
Little Rock.
I'm from the Northwest.
Yes. Uh-huh.
I'm not a fashion guy, but in your research, just looking at this from no perspective of understanding fashion, did you discover any connection between Andy Warhol, who took kind of industrial things and made it art, and Halston, who took art and kind of industrialized it with J.C.
I think so. You've cracked the film. That's it. That's what it's about. No, but I mean, there's a reason why they shared so much. I mean, they were really good friends because, they were both gay men from the Midwest who had come to New York to sort of reinvent themselves and sort of create a new type of society. I mean, I think they both felt very constrained by the rules of the society and who was in and who was not, and they were like, no, we're not. We're going to be in, and we're going to create our own, and that's what you see with Studio 54. I mean, this type of, and then of course in the work that they did, just like you said, it's like this idea of like mass consumption and democratic approach to art. Yeah. Would you?
Well, it's a very astute observation, and at some point after I published the book, I was trying to get together an exhibit, and in my research, I went to the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, and the director sat me down on a Saturday on his day off and said, would you like us to sponsor an exhibit? Because we see all these overlays with both of their lives. So it was a fabulous exhibit that traveled from Pittsburgh to Charlotte and Des Moines, where Halston was from, and very well received, but it was a great exploration of their lives, their overlapping lives, their collaborations, and some funny stuff too that they did together. They poked fun at each other all the time too, but it was very well done. And more recently, talking about exhibits, I put together an exhibit with Carl Willers up there, a museum director, which was a retrospective exhibit on Halston's life, but throughout the retrospective exhibit, there are a number of collaborations that Halston did with various artists, but Andy was represented there too.
You also, Lesley, said that if Halston had lived longer, that you felt he would have embraced technology as his new horizon, because he was always looking at what was new and what was next.
He was clever. He could have figured out computers and how to do all the, he probably would have been pushing with one finger, and he did have big fingers, so it would have been a bit of a challenge for him, but he was always looking to the future endeavors and technology. He would have embraced it. He would have been the first person also to make sustainable clothing. So he was a forward thinker, visionary and I just wanted to say vice versa, that the last scene with Tavi wearing the red dress he was inspired by the Greek antiquities. It looked sort of like a Greek robe that a woman, that you see on the Greek statues. And it's timeless. I mean, I could still wear that dress. He gave it to my mother in 1970, but I've worn it a few times lately, and it's timeless.
It's amazing, yeah.
Additional questions? Yes, all the way in the back.
Is there any place that his apparel is on display or an exhibit?
Very soon, hopefully in Dallas, we'll have a lot of it on display.
We hope, yes.
The venue is to be determined, and the date as well, the time, but there are always little Halston exhibits popping up everywhere. In Indiana, of course, where he came from, the Indianapolis Museum does reoccurring Halston exhibits. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts is about to launch into a Elsa Peretti exhibit, and of course they collaborated a lot, so I'll be donating some pieces to that. But I'll keep you posted on the next big Halston exhibit.
We look forward to that here.
My first recollection of ever knowing about Halston was when he did the flight attendant uniforms for Braniff. And I thought he must be so important because, you know, he had the interlocking H's in the fabric, which had, the H had nothing to do with Braniff. You know?
Yeah. Smart.
Anything that you discovered about that and how that came to be?
Well, it was kind of a long story, but within the circles, the wife of the Braniff, and I don't remember her name, I'm sorry, but she was one of Halston's customers, and right, thank you, Mary Wells Lawrence, and so I think she was the one that maybe reached out to Halston. Would you like to do this? Because they had painted the planes. They had Calder paint the plane, so that was sort of a start. Then they had Warhol doing some commercials with Sonny Liston, remember him? And so I guess it just made sense that Halston would be the next one in line to have some sort of commercial endeavor with them. But it was a big splashy party in Acapulco, and all the who's who went there to enjoy. It was a couple of days event, and it put Braniff was already on the map, but it gave it a lot of pizzazz, and I think it folded shortly thereafter.
Any other questions? Yes?
Lesley, I'm wondering if you would speak about what the emotional experience is watching this play again for you.
I was trying to kind of get through this one without crying, so it's very emotional. I was very close. I was right in the middle of it, in the thick of it, and it's impossible for anyone to see a loved one suffer as they were with their business and suffering and paying all this money to attorneys and then becoming sick and nothing really we could do. I mean, it was at the beginning of the AIDS crisis, and so many people in that circle were dropping like flies and, you know, not talking about it. I remember I was working in a photo studio up above Bill King, and he fell sick, and it was all these little whispers around, oh, what's he got? And it was that sort of stigma that was, I guess, to some people an embarrassment. They didn't want to reveal it. Many people weren't out yet. That was all of a sudden, we can't avoid it now. You know, everybody's going to know. So it was difficult, extremely trying. And this just brings it all back, so it's hard to talk about it.
I imagine, yeah.
Leslie, what happened to you when J.C. Penney's, when he sold, or when he combined with J.C. Penney's? What happened to you? Where did you go? What did you do?
Well, I was working at the Olympic Tower with Halston in the fall of '83, and that was shortly after the license was signed. And the other side of the office building was where the J.C. Penney crew was. So I was mostly helping Halston with his high fashion and his made-to-order business and his clients. But what happened was that shortly thereafter, the rug was pulled out from all of us, and Halston went to Montauk, his house on the seaside in Montauk, to calm down and regroup and breathe the sea air. And they were trying to squeeze me out, but he recommended that I ask for a leave of absence. So I took a leave of absence for several months. And that's kind of when we started becoming very close, because we were there together every day, and I'd make him breakfast and coffee, and we'd chat out on the chaise longue, watching the waves roll in and the clouds blow by. And soon thereafter, we were all fired. So it wasn't a happy time.
Yes, right here.
If it's been answered, I apologize. What's the status now of the Halston brand? Who owns that, or is it still owned by the successor to Playtex International, or is it
It has morphed many times, and currently, the last I heard, is Cameron here?
No, he left.
He left?
Okay.
So the last I heard, there were 3 different spin-offs. The Halston Heritage was sort of the upper line. Then there was H by Halston and H Halston. And Cameron is the director of the last 2, and he has a presence online and on QVC. The umbrella company overall is Hilco, which is based out of Canada, and they own a lot of different fashion department stores and whatnot. But it's fast fashion now. It's called fast fashion.
Yes.
As emerging designers nowadays, if, let's say, Halston was alive today, what is like one big piece of advice do you think he would give to emerging designers in this day and age?
Well, you would know better. I mean, I don't know. I can tell you, I've never met Halston, but I can give what I think we try to show in the film, and I try to remind Lesley even earlier today in the car. She was like, "It's such a sad story." I'm like, "It's not sad. For me, it's an aspirational story. Like, you could do anything, you can risk everything. You need to take every risk in life, and as Liza Minnelli sings, you know, you'll never win if you never play." So I think, for me, that's my takeaway from Leslie's uncle's
And
story.
don't sell your name.
Well,
Because
also,
there
yes.
actually, after this, there were many other cases where designers actually sold their names, and they, you know, none of them had any future beyond that. So that he was just, I think he was a pioneer on every level. I mean, we had, you know, yes, we had, I mean, today, obviously, we have, you know, Target is selling big name designers, capsule collections. It's highly celebrated, and you can sell online, and you can sell a high end in your diffusion lines, and he was just thinking that direction comfortably before anyone was ready for it.
The world
Yeah.
wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, a lot of young designers are part of conglomerates. I think today people are much more prepared because lawyers know what to look out for, and they structure the deal in a way that, you know, maybe you get the financial, you know, participation, but you don't sell everything.
Everything,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Leslie, does the Townhouse still exist? Do you know? And if so, where in Manhattan is it?
The Townhouse does exist. It was designed by Paul Rudolph, and the 4th owner has just purchased it and has moved into it, and his name is Tom Ford.
Ah, good question, Paul. Okay, I think we're ready to, I can take one more question if there's one more. They're probably starving and ready for dinner. Yes, sir.
Lesley, Halston was your uncle, and this is kind of a personal question, and I hope it doesn't come across as offensive at all, please. But you always call him Halston, and I'm just wondering, do you sometimes think of him like a separate entity rather than my uncle, or does that make sense what I'm asking?
Well, it's a good question, but I do often refer to him as Uncle Halston. And there was, when I was younger, you know, my friends would tease me, you know, we would have different versions of how I called him, but Uncle Hal, but I suppose, yeah, there's probably a little bit of that if I refer to him as Halston, he's that designer there.
That's what I was thinking. As I listened to you speak, I always thought, every time you said Halston, like you're thinking of the great Halston, you know, like a separate entity.
Well, and my father and mother taught me and my brothers to be very humble as much as we could and quiet. And so for the first many, many decades of my life, because there's been a few, I wouldn't talk about him publicly, you know, because I didn't want people to know I was related to him. But it wasn't until I published the book, my good friend Liz said, "You just published a book and you have to try and market it and you have to start talking about him." So I'm coming out of my shell still. So I'll remember that, and I'll always from now on refer to him as my Uncle Halston.
That's great. Well, I wanted to share, yes, thank you both for being
you.
here, for Frédéric and for
Thank you so
Lesley.
much.
And I just wanted to let all of you know that on June 7th, that's the magic day that Halston opens at the Angelika in Dallas and
Yes.
Plano. So thank you for being with us tonight, and I hope you attend many other films the next couple of days.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both.